Okay, so the second part of the square root stuff, you're gonna have to think a little bit more. It starts to push into your creativity a little bit and your factoring skills a little bit. But it is something that hopefully, I believe you've done before at different points. So hopefully this is a little bit of a review. Still have our perfect squares number line up here. We're gonna use it a lot more explicitly now. Like we're gonna be looking for these perfect squares. Okay, because everything in the rest of section 3 is about simplifying stuff with square roots so that it's in its simplest form, which makes it easier to work with when there's other square roots around. Okay, so when we do that, we're going to use our factoring skills, like our 3rd, 4th grade, whenever you did that factoring skills where you make like the factor tree, so you have like the number 18 and you break it into 9 times 2, and then you can break the 9 apart and so on. Okay, so there's 4 main properties that we use with square roots. The 4 properties are up here, and then we have 4 examples, 1 of each property up there, but they're just kind of scrambling around. So you can watch this and take down the first 4 properties. And if you want to try to do the 4 examples already on your own, awesome. Otherwise, you can just use them as continued examples as a group here. The 4 properties, what we're trying to do is we're trying to simplify these. We're trying to reduce this as much as possible, get as much out of the root as we can, because again, then it makes it easier to match up and find like terms and things like that. So we can break apart and put together square roots using multiplication and division. Okay, and we can do both of those because multiplication and division are basically this exact same operation. They're just written a little bit different. Okay, so we're going to use this to simplify. What does a simplified square root mean? Well, it means there's no squares left underneath here. So if there's any like perfect squares in the root, we want to take those out. And then there's also no square roots in the denominator. Okay, because for the most part, like people dislike fractions enough already to begin with. And those are normal fractions. You start throwing fractions there that have root 2's in the bottom, it's really hard to visualize. Like if it's a 2 on the bottom and I'm talking about halves, I know what halves look like. Okay, I don't know what root 2's look like. So we want to get nice normal fractions, at least for the denominators. Okay, the first property is the main one. It's the one that gets used the most, and it's hopefully also the simplest one to use. It says, hey, if I have something like the square root of 12, can I break it apart? Okay, can I split it up into 2 things that multiply to give me a 12? With one of them being a perfect square. So I'm looking for perfect squares. And that's where this number line comes in. And you'll get used to that set of numbers because you're just going to see them so often. The main ones that you're going to look for, 4s and 9s. Can I divide it by 4? Can I divide it by 9? Okay. And then like the more comfortable you get, the more you start looking for the bigger ones, because the bigger square you can get out of it, the better off you're going to be, because it's going to speed up how fast you can work on the problem. Okay, so I look at the square root of 12. Can I divide 12 by any of these perfect squares? And the answer is yes. I can divide it by a 4. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to break 12 into 4 times 3, which is totally fine. Like that'll work because I can put them back together and get the 12 that I started with. Okay. The reason this works so well is then the square root of 4 is something that I know. Okay, that's a familiar number. The square root of 4 is just the number 2. Okay, and when I take the square root of something, there's obviously no square root symbol left because the square root of 4 is the number 2. Okay. The square root of 3, is there anything else I can do with the 3 to break it apart? Well, I'll look up here. Can I divide a 3 by any of these numbers? No, I can't. Okay, so this will just stay. So the square root of 4 is the number 2, and that square root of 3 I can't do anything with. Okay, so the square root of 12 is the exact same thing as 2 square roots of 3. And again, the reason we break that down is that it makes it easier to find other common terms, because when they're all reduced, they're all going to match, or they'll all look the same. Okay, and you can do this. You can plug this in your calculator, punch in square root of 12, punch in 2 square roots of 3. They should come out to be the exact same decimal. Okay, so that's our first property. We have a square root. We can break it apart. Okay, the second property is the reverse of this. If I can break this apart into 4 and 3, I have to be able to put it back together. Okay, 4 times 3 makes 12. I'm back where I started. Okay, and that property comes in handy when you have 2 separate ones that are multiplied together, okay, and neither one of them work out perfect. Okay, square root of 8 is not a perfect square. Square root of 2, not a perfect square. Okay, but if I put them together, 8 times 2, that would make the square root of 8 times 2, or 16. Okay, and that'll happen a lot, where if you have 2 squares that don't work on their own, multiply them together, you should a lot of times get something nice, because the square root of 16 is just 4. Okay. And again, you can punch this into your calculator. Should come out to 4. Should come out to 4. Obviously does come out to 4. Okay. So first property, you can take them apart. Second property, you can put them together. Okay. And even if you put them together and it doesn't work out perfect, it's not a big deal. It's a lot easier to do one where there's just one square root instead of 2 separate ones anyway. So if you ever have 2 square roots, multiply together, smash them together into 1 and see what happens. Okay. Worst case scenario, you go back to this and using that first property. Okay, properties 3 and 4 then aren't anything new. Property 3 is just the fraction or dividing version of this one. Property 4 is just the fraction or dividing version of this one. Yeah, so this one says, hey, if I have a giant square root with a fraction inside of it, I can break it apart just like I could break this apart, which is good, because if I break it apart, it's a square root of 25 on the top, and a square root of 16 on the bottom. And it is exactly what you'd hope it'd be just at the very beginning. If I square root this, I'm going to get a 5 on the top and a 4 on the bottom. Okay, so anytime you have one big fraction, you can separate them just like here, you separated them. Okay, and then property 4, okay, just like this one, if you have 2 separate ones and they don't work by themselves, smash them together and see what happens. Okay, anytime you're multiplying or dividing, it's the exact same operation. You can put them back together. And if I put these together, 18 divided by 2 should come out perfect. Get the square root of 9. Okay, and then the square root of 9 is just 3. Okay, and it doesn't always work out perfect. Like the property ones, I made simple enough ones where you could see that happen. But even if it doesn't work out perfect, you still, again, are in much better shape only having 1 square root instead of 2. Okay, it makes the math way easier. Okay, so those are your 4 properties. Again, just get used to them. You use them all the time, and you'll start to use them without even thinking about like which property it is. It's just you're trying to simplify things as best as you can. Okay, so these 4 examples on the right then, if you want to pause the video here and try them, again, they're kind of scrambled, but they use each of the properties once. That's awesome. If not, we'll just keep going, and you can check the answers at the end if you try to do them on your own. Okay, so simplify each expression. The negative, who cares? Just make sure your answer is negative at the end. And this is the square root of 50. Okay, 50 does not come out perfect, okay, but hopefully I can break it down and shrink it and get something out of it. Okay, so I look at this list of numbers. Is there anything up here that I can divide a 50 by? Okay, and hopefully you'll realize 25 is it. Okay, so I can split 50 into 25 and 2, okay, which works great, okay, because the square root of 25 is just the number 5. Square root of 25 is the number 5. Square root of 2. Okay, so just like that first property there, breaks down pretty fast. And the other thing that's really good about this that goes way beyond square root stuff and way beyond algebra is this really good for just your basic multiplication and division skills. Okay, so this is one of those things where the more you do it, the better you'll get at basic math without even really realizing it, which is really cool. So 5 square roots of 2, and then don't forget the original problem was negative, so just slap the negative on there. Okay, example 2, square root of a giant fraction. Again, it technically doesn't work as 1, but you can separate it, but hopefully you know ahead of time, like you see 49 and you see 81, and hopefully the answer then is going to be 7 over 9, and it will, because you can separate them, you get 7 over 9. Okay, and once you've done this once or twice, don't worry about writing that step out anymore, okay, because I get that you can see it, you can go straight from here to the answer, it's not a big deal. Okay. Example 3, the square root of 5 doesn't work by itself, the square root of 20 doesn't work by itself, so this is just like this one. Smash them together and hope something good happens. Okay, and even if it doesn't work out perfect, at least now you only have 1 to break down instead of 2. Okay, so 5 times 20 makes 100. Square root of 100 is perfect. It's just the number 10. Okay. And at the end, again, you can always take a calculator, check it, do square root of 5 times square root of 20, should come out to 10. And then the final one, you've got a fraction with the square root on the top and on the bottom. Neither one of these work out perfect. So what you should do is smash them together and hope something good happens. If I put them together, square root of 96 divided by 6 is what? 1 and 3, 16. Yeah, so square root of 16 comes out perfect to a 4. Again, you can divide them by hand there and see, should come out perfect. So this should be the longest of all of the videos here, so I apologize, it got a little long, but there's a lot in here. Once you get this piece, then the square root stuff, the rest of it is not that big a deal.